Good morning, everybody, and welcome to you wherever you're joining us from in the world, and welcome to this Security Navigator 2022 event from Orange Cyberdefense. I'm Jeff White. I'm an author and investigative journalist. I'll be your host for today's session, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. For those of you who don't know, I'm an investigative journalist. I've covered technology for, among others, BBC News, Sky News, Channel 4 News. I was the co-host for the BBC's hit podcast, The Lazarus Heist, last year, which was all about North Korean hackers. And spoiler alert, I've just finished writing the book of The Lazarus Heist, which is going to be out in June this year. So if you fancy checking that out, that could be quite exciting too. But listen, most importantly, we're going to be drilling into Orange Cyberdefense's Security Navigator report today and getting behind the report to give some information that isn't in those pages. There can be plenty of time for you to ask questions at the end yourselves. So please, if you've got those burning questions, don't wait until the end. You can put them in the questions panel. We'll be gathering them together as we go along and asking them of our panelists at the end. Speaking of which, we have a fantastic set of people to be answering your questions here this morning. We have Charl van der Veld, who's Head of Security Research for Orange Cyberdefense, Emmanuel David, who's their Technical Director, Wolfson de la Guerre, who's Investigations Manager at CSIRT. We have Leon Jacobs, who's Chief Technical Officer, Offensive Security, Dana Selt-Paulsen, who's Lead Security Researcher, Andreas Günther, Director of Service Design and Development for the CyberSOC, and Alain Coppens, who is Mobile Security Product Manager. So we really have the full gamut of experts from Orange Cyberdefense joining us for the session this morning. We're thrilled to have you all here as well, your attendees, wherever you are calling from. It's going to be a really fantastic session. As you know, the Security Navigator report is a key piece of research from Orange Cyberdefense, pulling in data from their 18 CyberSOCs. They're going to look at the data points that are not in the Cyber Navigator and go beyond the facts shared in that report to make some hypotheses about the state of the threat. So there are all of our speakers. Give us a wave and you can see who we got on the call. Good stuff. Also, make sure that they can all hear me and that I can see them. So there we go. Look, I want to start first, Dana, with you, if I may. I couldn't help noticing as a big Douglas Adams fan that the number 42 features in the report. And I wondered, Dana, can you explain why that is and what you've found out about that figure?
Yeah, definitely. The number 42 seems to be the ultimate answers for our customers, apparently. Yeah, so, over the years, I think it's the 4th year that we're doing this report. We see an increase, of course, in the incident data. But the question is, is that really because we see an increase in the threat, or is this because, we're growing as an organization and we're onboarding more customers? And I think we're trying to really, put as much context to our data as we can in the Security Navigator report. And we found that we came across 94,000 incidents. So that means actually that our security analyst, like a human, has looked at 94,000 tickets. That's quite a lot. And they have determined after investigation and analysis that 34,000 were confirmed. And we want to try to kind of put context to, does that really mean we see more? And we've done that by looking at how many incidents a customer has experienced on average per month in comparison to last year. So last year in 2020, we saw that our customers experienced an average 37 incidents per month. And this year it was an increase of 13%, so it was 42, and that's where the number comes from. So we did see an increase of that our customers are struggling with confirmed security incidents.
Interesting stuff. Although, as Paul Simon once sang, there are incidents and accidents, incident allegations. I wonder, how are you defining incidents, and can you explain how you're measuring all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is we look at incident data at specific services from our global CyberSOCs. And I say specific services because we're not including or putting in consideration all the data that we have. I think we include almost, the majority of the data, but it's the data that we feel the most comfortable with, and, including like maturity, and that we can actually compare them from year to year. And then we zoom out 12 months. So we have actually a really good timeline to also see, by time, how does the incident volume change. As said, we had 94,000 incidents that were investigated by our analysts. And what we mostly do is then we focus a bit more on the confirmed security incidents and just check every year what sticks out, what theme or trends do we see that stick out, and that is what we analyzing and what we're writing down in the Security Navigator report.
Interesting stuff. And so can you tell us a bit more about what forms these incidents, what actually causes these incidents, and drill down into a bit more of the detail for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the interesting things to do. So the confirmed security incidents that we are seeing in our customers is or are the incidents where we have the most knowledge. So we've gained the most knowledge, we have the most incident documentation on them. And what we want to do is basically we want to learn from them. And one specific where it could be, how can we reduce confirmed security incidents in the future for our customers? And one way to look at that is who caused them in the first place. And I think, people who are not working with incidents per se might have, cyber attacks, a little bit the picture in the mind of the very sophisticated external hacker. And that might be, of course, those incidents exist. But what our data shows, and I want to show a slide to that, where we're looking at the past 6 months of 2021. So it's a little more extensive data that we show in our Security Navigator report. And we see actually that we have a split of 50-50 almost, where we look at, which or who caused it internally and who caused it externally. And I think it's important to highlight that, when we think about, or when we see actually the internal threat, we kind of see 2 scenarios. One is that an internal threat actor could be really like intentionally wanting to inflict harm, but we also have the scenario of the unintentional, accidental, unknowingly user in an organization that causes those insider threats. And if we look very closely, we actually do see a little bit more of insider threat than external threat actors. And I think it's super interesting. And I think my colleague Andreas is going to talk a little bit more how that looks in practice.
Yes, thanks, Diana. So let's have a look at the data more specifically. So as presented, we almost see an equal split between internally and externally caused security incidents. So looking at the data from our customers, the relevant question to answer for you is, which insights can you gain out of the data? So what is relevant for your corporate network? So let's have a look at the slide together. We see significant differences in attack types, as we call it, threat actions. So which our customers are experiencing right now. Let's first have a look at the internal threat actors, where we can see that over 1/3 of all confirmed incidents were caused by misuse. That could be common scenarios such as privilege abuse, usage of unapproved hardware, software, scripts, and so on. Next, we have the malware events, which over 1/4 of all confirmed incidents occur. We see malware in the top 3 actions actually in both internally and externally caused incidents. Also, a very interesting finding is the fact that our CyberSOC teams detect and confirm more malware incidents when they were caused by an internal threat actor before. Other common scenarios are adware, backdoors, and possibly C2 communication tools. So let's also have a look at errors, which is 18% of all confirmed incidents. It's not very surprising given that insiders, mostly employees, are the most trusted users with the highest privileged user accounts in your corporate network. We typically see a lot of misconfiguration, carelessness. So let's have a look at the external threat actors now. Here we see a lot of hacking pen testing activities, over 50% of all confirmed incidents, which can be attempts to intentionally access or manipulate data. It could be reconnaissance events such as port scans, port sweeps, but also web attack attempts such as cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and so on. The second most frequent action is called or classified by us as social, which can also be the attack vector in that same case. Any tactics that employ either deception, manipulation, exploitation of the human element, user, or the information assets. Of course, the typical events such as spear phishing, phishing, and spam occur as well. And one final insight I would like to share from having worked in a CyberSOC for quite some time now, attacks are much more likely to be successful and more harmful when both internal and external threat actors are involved.
Really interesting. Thanks for that. Yeah, the nightmare scenario of an inside and outside threat. Andreas, thank you for that. Really interesting stuff. Well, that's a good opener for the session. And the question, of course, is where we go next. And in a radical move, Orange Cyberdefense are giving you, the audience, the choice of where to go next. There are 4 themes they want to pick up, but they couldn't decide which one to go with first. So we're going to give you that opportunity. And in a sort of Simon Cowell X Factor type way, we're going to ask 4 of the speakers from Orange Cyberdefense to pitch which of the things we should hear about next, and then you, the audience, get to vote on which one you're most excited about and want to hear about. So I'm going to come to Charl van der Veld first to talk about the topic of manufacturing. Charl, fill us in.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, manufacturing. So manufacturing as an industry really stands out in our data, both when we look at our customer incidents, the stuff Diana was talking about, but also when we look at data from other research projects, like where we monitor confirmed double extortion events. And it's very clear. And I don't understand why. I'm very curious to speak to some of our experts. I've got a theory, but I'd like to talk about, like, why is it that manufacturing apparently stands out like that?
Interesting. Okay, right. Robinson de la Guerre, can you fill us in on your bit, which is about non-English speaking countries and territories being targeted? Fill us in, give us the pitch.
Sure, Jeff, with pleasure. So we are monitoring figures on cyber extortion threats, and we've seen a steady rise, of course, of the numbers of victims around the globe. But while the victims by country in 2021 are still tracking with the global economy of the country, we see a number of victims, the number of victims in non-English speaking countries growing way faster than average. So we propose to delve into this, into the how and the why of this phenomenon and this impact for the defense.
Interesting, Robinson, thank you for that. So Leon Jacobs is going to pitch the idea of mobile operating threats. Leon, give us the overview.
Thanks, Jeff. So if you have a look at the Navigator report, there are some clear trends in terms of vulnerabilities increasing on mobile platforms, iOS, etc. At the same time, there's also a trend towards using the mobile as a security component as part of our corporate security. So with this contrast in mind, there are some questions that come out. Some of those attacks are quite advanced, state level, and we wonder, is that the kind of thing that might become a commodity on the one side, and then on the other side, what do we do about that? How do we respond?
Yeah. Interesting stuff. That's a good one. Leon, that's great. Thank you. And lastly, Emmanuel, talking about security vendor vulnerabilities. Emmanuel, David.
Yes, thanks, Jeff. Well, we've seen for several years now, actually, that the numbers of vulnerabilities, including security vendors, keep on growing. So I wonder, but actually, when we do our own exercises, being on the front end with the pen testing we do for our customers, or after the fact with the incident response we do for our customers, do we also see something growing around that? And of course, again, does it have to do only with the pandemic, which is the usual excuse, or does it have to do with other factors in the market we are all in security?
Interesting. Yeah, hot topic that, Emmanuel. Right, it is time for you, the audience, to decide which you want to hear about first. So there are your possibilities. Geographical shift in ransomware attacks targeting non-English speaking countries could be a hot one for our audience. We also have vulnerabilities in security vendor products. Again, a massive issue over the last year. SolarWinds, Kaseya, Microsoft Exchange, and so on. Manufacturing sector more impacted than others, an intriguing one from Charl there. And also mobile operating systems increasingly being exploited, particularly working from home, multi-factor authentication, and so on. So cast your votes now. I'm going to give you another, 15 seconds-ish. The votes are flooding in. If you haven't seen where to cast your vote, there's a little polls thing up in the corner of the screen. Look for polls and click that tab and you'll be able to vote in there. The voting is fast and furious. And it's going back and forth between, security vendor product, unsurprisingly, is a popular one, but also mobile operating systems, interesting. It's neck and neck between those two. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to vote. Cast your vote. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. I was going to try and do this in French, but it's beyond me. 4, 3, 2-1. Well, that is a clear winner. 40% of our audience want to hear about vulnerabilities in security vendor products. Those are the results. We give you the evidence here at the Orange Cyberdefense team. So listen, let's start talking about that topic. And I'm going to come to our experts on this. We scroll down to our notes here. Charl, can you kick us off on this one? Is this just about patching? You know, how fast you can patch when the vulnerability comes out?
Yeah, so patching is a emergent theme, clearly. So just to reiterate, what we're seeing is that not only is the number of vulnerabilities affecting the kinds of technologies that we use to protect ourselves, you know, particularly firewalls and remote access, you know, VPNs, that the number of vulnerabilities has grown very dramatically over the last few years, but they're also being used in the wild. And it'd be interesting to hear from Robinson and Leon on the cold face what they're seeing. But in our data, we're seeing it clearly. And then and they're being used in the wild, and they're being used successfully to exploit businesses, not just by state actors, but also by like malware operators and ransomware operators, etc. And the response available to our clients is to know that there's a vulnerability and patch it. But what our data suggests is that because with remote working, because these vulnerabilities have become, sorry, not these vulnerabilities, these technologies have become so key in our sort of operating environments, there's a kind of a reluctance to patch them. There's also other things in the ecosystem about how these technologies are managed that makes it difficult to patch them. And we make an argument in the Navigator that actually we think there's a lot of disorganization in the vendor community around how the vulnerabilities are disclosed. In other words, if you have 5 different security technologies in your business, you have to track 5 different feeds in 5 different ways with 5 different interfaces. So there's a patching problem, definitely, which sits on the user, but we actually think there's a call to action for the vendors also to build better cohesion, better flow into the workflows around disclosing vulnerabilities.
Really interesting. Yeah, on that thing about pen testing, I think it's good to bring in Leon here. Leon, as a pen tester on the offensive security side, how useful are these security vendors and vulnerabilities to you? How often are you hitting those in order to try and you know, break into your customers on their behalf, as it were?
To directly answer it, it's usually a super hot target for us. If we have to compare, you know, we have some form of foothold. We now need to choose what we need to go after. You know, keeping in mind that's going to determine the next step. Targeting a security technology is usually quite an attractive one, and that's for a number of reasons. If you consider, you know, without naming a product, something that you would install an agent on a whole bunch of places. Compromising that central administration component of it could potentially mean you also have access on endpoints where that agent lives. So if the product allows for code execution, you know, that implies a compromised instance of that product grants us access to also perform code execution. And it can also have some other interesting effects where it might have access to a network you don't have access to right now, you know, because of good segmentation and that kind of thing. So it's absolutely something that we've both have targeted successfully. But you know, success aside, it's a very attractive component within the architecture to go after when compared to a payroll system, for argument's sake, when we're speaking about access.
Really interesting. Emmanuel, can I come to you on this in terms of what businesses can do about this? You know, Charles outlined a fairly tricky issue there, which is the number of different vendors you've got, you know, the times they were announcing their patches, how you put all this together. Emmanuel, I just wonder if you've got any advice for our viewers about what they can do about this, how they can manage it.
Well, actually, as Charl mentioned, the tricky thing is that everyone is different, really. And that's also something we mentioned in the report. As long as we don't have any common way of looking at things, so to be aware of, is there a vulnerability? But also, when you know, how do you patch it? It is still way too complicated. So there is really the way forward, I would say, is really to convince the vendors that they need to work together on this. And even more so that we also see that it's a very volatile market. And I mean by that, there's a lot of takeovers, a lot of volatility in indeed companies being changed and being integrated, which makes the vulnerability even more probable, because if you look at it, there are still two different development teams potentially which have different ways of working, which have different ways of testing, which means at the end that the software they produce has more probability to be vulnerable. So I would say the only advice we can give really is on the architecture level and on business continuity analysis. So to consider those, and I think it's pretty obvious now with the way that we use them, to consider those as really business critical for almost any business today. And that means that in a business continuity plan, you have to be aware that if those are not available or are being attacked or vulnerable, you have to have ways to work without them. And have maybe a better architecture indeed, as mentioned, maybe have a better segmentation so that the impact is smaller. So it's really, on one side, I would say to keep on working on the market, so on the vendors, to convince them to work a better way so that we can handle those vulnerabilities easier. But then on the other side, on the architecture level, to make sure that the impact is limited.
Interesting. Thanks, Emmanuel, Charl, and Leon. That's really interesting stuff. If you guys want to switch off your webcams, we'll move on to our next most popular topic, which was mobile operating systems increasingly being targeted. And I'm going to bring in Alain Coppens on this, just to sort of talk about what's different between what you saw between 2020 and 2021, and what that tells us about how mobiles are being targeted by the attackers.
Yes, thank you. But in fact, during 2020 and 2021, we've seen the growth of the numbers of malware overall affecting all type of equipments. We do say that about laptops, PC, personal computers, etc. Remain stable, in fact, and even decreased at the end of 2021. But on the other hand, at the same time, we were able to observe that a rapid growth of malware targeting mobile. And from the third quarter of 2020, about 35% until now. We do suspect that it was probably due to the pandemic, for sure, because of the obligation of the users to work from home, and the attackant they decided to access directly to the mobile and not necessarily to the enterprise. Because if you do have access to your mobile, normally you are connected from your VPN from your connection. You can access with your 4G connection or 5G right now. Connection to access to your enterprise with your laptop and with your PC. So if you cannot put a malware inside your mobile, you can access through the VPN inside your company, and automatically you should access to access everything and so access all the data and exfiltration, something like that. So they decided to change their strategy. The attacker decided to change the strategy and adapt the strategy to the mobile, in fact. And at the end of 2021, we also saw vulnerabilities attacks specifically on iPhones. We can see, for example, that there is a slide I would like to show you about mobiles, which is very interesting. In fact, if you see this slide, we do consider that Android is more unsecure. We should say that when we compare to iOS. But in fact, if you do see the vulnerabilities that has been discovered by CVEs during the last 11 years, you can see on the left that Android is around 4,000 CVEs discovered, and on the right, this is for iOS, this is 5,000. So it does mean that, in fact, the iOS is also threats. There are also many threats on those iOS. So and if you can see the red line, you can compare the both. In fact, we do consider that high threats are in the same proportion for the both as Android and iOS, around the 50%. So another thing which is very strange and very important for hackers, that as we mentioned before, last year, so the attackant tried to access to iOS, and a well-known attacks was Pegasus, which one was known for our president in France, for example. But you know that, and we also observed that, for example, Zerodium, a bug bounty platform, we was able to offer $2 million for an iOS exploit. So it's very strange. So 2 million, this is a lot of money for an exploit. So any sound of that, Leon, please?
Finding the unmute button. Sure. Thanks, Elaine. Absolutely, $2 million is a lot of money. And I think a little bit of perspective on, on what that might mean is, I'll start off by saying, modern mobile operating systems genuinely are an engineering marvel from the outside all the way down to a software and hardware integration level. This genuine, it's quite surprising actually when you dive into that details a little bit. But if you take recent news, Pegasus as an example, which is quite significant, and read about a blog post that Google Project Zero put out detailing a zero-click vulnerability that's formed parts of the suite. The vulnerability itself, targets a GIF parser in iOS's iMessage, and that's sort of outside the blast door sandbox. But the detail around it in terms of complexity, the authors of this exploit sort of leveraged the decompression capability for glyphs, so it's like a faxing scanning thing. But more impressively, part of the decompression, they had this logic gate architecture that they could leverage to change memory and arbitrary locations on the device. Now, that's effectively a little computer architecture that they've built just to get some code execution outside of the security protections that iOS has, which we can argue is incredibly sophisticated. We start talking about $2 million for that kind of capability, and it sort of starts to make a little bit of sense when you read about these little bit of details. Now, the question being, is that the type of stuff that we'll see become commoditized for cyber criminals? I don't think a zero-click remote exploit is probably on the cards yet. Not ignoring something like jailbreaks, which has come around for a long time, which also compromises the integrity of the sandbox. But quite bluntly said, I'm hopeful that the dividends or the investment over time in terms of the architecture pays off such that it remains complicated. It remains a $2 million conversation. But that said, it's probably need to talk mitigations. What do people do about that stuff? I don't know, Elaine, if you have some comments on that.
Okay, and well, what I should say for me for the recommendation, we should propose that the first thing is that all the companies have an antivirus on a PC, but they do not care right now. We do consider that when a company on two does consider that there is an antivirus for the mobile. I should say an antivirus, something to protect the mobile. So it's very important to protect your mobile fleet. In fact, the usage has also changed because last year and because of the pandemic, the company decided to send mobiles to the company, to the users, and new parameters has appeared. We call it BYOD, so being your own device and copy. The fact that you use your mobile phone or your company phone with personally enabled. So it's very important to protect the both containers that appears with this kind of usage. You have a pro usage for your company and you have a personal usage for your mobile phone. So it's very important, and we do consider that there is a strategy to protect the fleet on three pillars. The first one is to protect the application themselves. So we have to protect them about the new malware inside this application. The other one is the fact the operating system should be attacked, as you can see on this screen. And also the last one, but not the least, also is the fact that the network connection should be attacked. So the Wi-Fi connection, the NFC connection. We do notice MIT and mine in the middle attacks with a Starbucks coffee, something like that, which are very simple to do. And also, it's very important for us to detect this kind of attacks. So we do consider that the very strategic thing is to be up to date. It's very important because if you don't do the patches of your mobiles, you will have threats very easily. And the thing is, there is two kind of product to do that. Is the MTD solutions, so the mobile threat defense solutions to alert the users that there is a threat on the phones, and also the MDM solution, which can help to remediate, because the alert should be given to the MDM solutions, and in that case, the MDM solution should remediate and, for example, wipe the telephone or delete the application which is in your which is in the malware inside your mobile phone. So it's very important for us, but sure, the really true thing which is very important is to be up to date with your mobile fleet.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a key lesson, isn't it, Alain? That knowing what your hardware is out there in the workforce and making sure it's all up to date. Key lessons from that. Alain, Leon, thank you both for that. I'm going to ask you to switch your webcams on. We're going to move on, off rather. We're going to move on to our next topic. Next in line was, which one was it? Oh yes, geographical shifts in ransomware attacks, non-English speaking countries being, economies and regions being targeted. Dan, I'm going to ask you about this one. It's intriguing. What's the sort of data behind it, first of all?
Yeah, exactly. So we monitor that threat of cyber extortion or ransomware double extortion since a while, and we have a really great data set to observe trends there. And in the Navigator report, we had the chance actually to look at the country the victims are headquartered. And we noticed, as Robinson already pitched a little bit, we noticed there's a little shift from English-speaking economies to non-English speaking economies. And I want to dive a little bit into some more data. And I have a slide on geographical shifts where I'm actually going to include data that we didn't had when we wrote the Navigator report. So we actually had Q4 data.
Exclusive. What we call an exclusive in the trade.
Yeah. And we have the chance now to do like a year-on-year comparison. So what have we seen in 2020? What have we seen in 2021? And does our statement still hold? So if we look to the left, we see the year-on-year comparison, and you see the US, Canada, UK as the English-speaking economies that we're considering here. And while we stated in the Navigator report that we saw a decrease, we actually now, when including Q4, we see an increase. So we see, for example, the US has increased in 2021, 30% in comparison to 2020. And the same goes for the other two. But then if we look to the right, to the non-English speaking economies, so Europe, Brazil, China, Japan, India, we see a much bigger growth than in comparison to English speaking countries. And I want to give a little perspective. So just below that chart, you see actually the absolute numbers. So I've actually added the biggest country by victim that we see in our data set. And then to the right, we see the country that has the biggest growth, and that's China. But if you look closely, you see that in 2021, we've only had 23 victims from China. It's because the numbers are very small for that country.
Okay.
Yeah. So we see more growth in non-English speaking economies. And then to the right, if we put it into proportion, so how much does each of that country, take a portion of the whole global trend that we're seeing? And we do see that the US, for example, kind of lost 8 percentage units. So, last year, or like in 2020, they took 56% of the share. 56% of all victims were based in the US, while in 2021, 48 were. And then, as just to round this up a little bit, we see that the English-speaking economies don't have as much of a share. There's a decrease, while the non-English-speaking countries taking more of the share in 2021. So and I think that's our finding, that the observation still holds, but the English-speaking growing as well. It's been so much volume in Q4, so much activity in that sphere. And I think we have a few ideas why that is, and Robinson is gonna dive into our theories a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Diana. Well, it's one of the main things that made the news was the response of the US government to Colonial Pipeline. And it was indeed a deterrent for threat actors, for ransomware threat actors, to target, specifically energy sectors and essential services in the US, but due to the way they work, most of them avoided the US completely. So this is the bulk of what we are seeing, but we have been seeing a trend that started at the beginning of 2021 of ransomware threat actors being a lot more efficient than they were before on non-English speaking victims. This is from a forensic point of view. 4 to 5 years ago, we had the case of threat actor tools simply breaking when the language of the operating system wasn't English US. This has gone away now, but we have seen them being more and more efficient and relevant in, for instance, the searches they do on file systems and SharePoints to find data to extract for ransom. And in a couple of cases we have treated this year, we have actually forensic proof of the threat actors, so the affiliate or the initial access broker, being actually French. As in people native from France who were living in France in the early 2000s. And this we can see from websites they visited, from searches and tools they used, which were unheard of outside of France. So our theory is that even before the Colonial Pipeline response, the big ransomware threat groups started a strategy of diversification and recruited initial access brokers and affiliates who were outside of their native recruitment pool, which is Eastern Europe, and having those affiliates from the other bigger economies that are not English speaking allows them to better reach the victims, to have possibly more efficient negotiations, but also, and from what we can see, to be better at their job of intrusion and privilege escalation.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and it is something we have heard victims say that we are not even a blip in the radar of Russian cybercrime. The point is, yes, you are, and they are doing stuff to be able to target you even better.
Interesting. Robinson, Diana, thank you for that. Really interesting stuff, that one. Well, we're just going to finish off on our last one of the 4 topics that we wanted to discuss, and that's the manufacturing industry being disproportionately represented. Charl, can you fill us in on this again? What's the sort of data, and then we'll look at sort of the hunches behind this.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so actually, I think that the data speaks for itself in the Navigator, so I don't want to kind of really zoom in on that. What I'd rather speak about is the explanation, and I've got a slide for this that summarizes our a theory we developed on the basis of formal criminology. So we wrote a paper that sort of tries to explain cybercrime by looking at what formal criminology said about why crime happens. And there's a very simple but I think powerful framework that talks about the suitability or the attractiveness of a victim to a criminal. It's captured in that bottom left-hand corner of the image we're looking at now. So crime needs an offender, it needs the lack of a guardian, and it needs a suitable or an attractive victim. And we have this acronym called VIVA that captures these variables that make a victim more suitable. The first is visibility. So how easy is it to see the victim? How exposed are they? How publicly visible are they? And that would speak to things like attack surface, but also web presence, whether your company is listed. How easy is it for the ransomware operator to find you? Secondly is vulnerability, and that clearly speaks to technical security hygiene. Are you patching? Are you changing passwords, etc.? The third speaks to available time. So once a robber has broken into your house, how free are they to wander around and collect the things that they want? So that speaks, I think, in our case to detection and response within the manufacturing industry. The fourth one is what they call inertia, which I think is fascinating, and it speaks to how easy a stolen object is to move. So in the real world, you'd argue that your wedding ring is easier to move than your fridge, so the wedding ring is going to be more attractive. And in the technical sense, I think that speaks to the organization's ability to throttle the exfiltration of data. And then the final one is value. Obviously, how much is it worth to the criminal? But the interesting thing when you're talking about the crime of cyber extortion is that the value we have to consider is not how valuable is it to the criminal, but how valuable is it to the victim. So to Robinson's point about, I'm not on the radar of Russian cybercrime, the reason that everybody is on the radar of Russian cybercrime is because everybody has something that's of value to them. And I suppose what this speaks to from a technical point of view is that the manufacturing industry is poorly positioned to recover from the theft of their data and the encryption of their data, and therefore more likely to become victims of cyber extortion, which is one of the things that we're watching. So I think that cybercrime theory sort of gives us some clues as to why manufacturing may be the more prevalent. But I think it'll be interesting to hear from people on the ground also, what their views are if there's time.
Really interesting stuff. Well, yes, actually, that's convenient enough exactly what we're about to do. I've been seeing questions flooding into the questions panel. If you still have questions, feel free to drop them in there. You'll see the questions thing over in the little panel on GoToWebinar over there. Please use that rather than the chat. Some really, really good questions coming in, and I'm going to hand over to Charl now to manage a few of those questions.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. We do have a number of, I think, really interesting questions. And I'm maybe going to start with a set of questions around mobile security. So to you, Leon, and to you, Elaine, maybe I can group some of these together. And I think there's sort of two themes. The one theme is that there's a question about like how exploitable are mobile OSs. What's the exploitation rate between mobile and Windows? And then there's a more specific question about a comment you made, Elaine, regarding security controls on mobile devices and whether whether something like AV or EDR is even effective on a mobile platform, given its architecture. So I wonder if I can start with you, Leon, and hear if you have any comments on the exploitability or exploitation rates for iOS and Android.
Sure, thanks, Charl. I don't think I have a really smart answer for that, given rates. That's going to be a numbers related thing, right? Maybe Elaine and some of the comments you made earlier in terms of the trending partially answers that. So I think there's sort of two interesting things about it. The initial, I'm taking the zero-click exploit and the Pegasus suite as an example, and the point really is it's a really complex vulnerability that gets exploited, and what that gets you is a foothold to now execute other pieces of code. Right now we can go for a privilege escalation or a sandbox evasion or whatever the thing might be. But that primitive coming from I send you a specially crafted GIF in an iMessage is an exceptional. Like it's unbelievable to imagine a small computer architecture as a metaphor to get code execution. The other side of it, I think, is the trend, and I think maybe Jeff mentioned it earlier, we have, or maybe Elaine, we think Android's less secure, iOS is more secure, or whatever the hypothesis might be. I think that's clearly not the case, purely based on some data. And I think it's also augmented by the fact, if we look at jailbreaks, when a phone gets jailbroken, it's effectively exploiting a vulnerability that gives them a privileged position on a device. And that's sort of the worst case scenario for an exploit or a piece of malware to leverage, a vulnerability that gives them privileged access inside of this pretty complex set of sandboxes and security boundaries. So to get to the point, I think because we've had jailbreaks for a long period of time, every new iOS is an opportunity for it to be harder to do. There are more exploit mitigations introduced, etc. I think while it makes it more complex, it's more research. People prove time and again that stuff can be bypassed. But I still think the bar is quite high. It's not a you walk into a shop and you buy some groceries. It takes a bit of investment to get to that point. I don't know, Elaine, if you maybe have some smarter answers in terms of.
Not so much, but about Pegasus. Just two words about Pegasus. In fact, the Pegasus threat is a well-known threat from 6 years, because it's a known threat from 2016, so it's very long. But the thing is that normally the white hackers should be paid, as we said before, for $2 million for an exploit, and the NSO group, well, we must say that they decided to not share this information, and that's why the threat is not known right now. And for example, if we like to to fight these threats, the malware should be inside your phone, your mobile phone, and instead in an iOS one, so not only an Android one, but in that case, this is an iOS one. And in fact, the malware is there, but we can observe what happens after the malware is there. And for example, if we try to exfiltrate data, in that case, we can observe how the data are exfiltrated, and we can block this data. That's why we do consider that the malware should be blocked right now. The other question was about antivirus. I should say antivirus, and you said that there is an antivirus well inside iOS and also inside Android. We do not say exactly antivirus. We talk about MTD solutions, so mobile threat defense solution. This is the three kinds of solution to treat the operating systems, the network, and also the application. That's it.
Thanks both. So, yes, Jeff, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a question. I wondered how often is it the case that the mobile targeting is a sort of adjunct to something, so targeting multi-factor authentication as part of an overall attack that you might be doing off mobile, and how much of it's just targeting mobile? Is it possible to say what the split is or what the trend is there even?
I can comment on that question, Jeff. So in our data, and I know Russ asked a similar question about Pegasus and is it reflected in our data. In our data, the trend that we're noticing is primarily attacks to target the mobile phone for the user's personal data. So it's very focused on the user themselves and driven by the likes of Pegasus, which features very highly in our data, and sponsored, I guess, by national priorities like surveillance or anti-terrorism or something. You do see, like just this week, there was an Android app, a malicious Android app that mimicked multi-factor authentication, but I don't think that's entirely the same thing. That's just a way of injecting the mobile app. But the question that I think we ask in the Navigator is, given that these capabilities are emerging that can target mobile phones, and given that mobile phones are increasingly becoming a part of the perimeter through things like multi-factor and passwordless, are we going to see a convergence between those two things? And I think the answer, just to summarize what both these gents have said, is that we don't know. Hacking mobile phones is still very difficult and very expensive. But if the mobile phone gets compromised, there is an opportunity for the attacker to subvert the MFA process. Right now, though, what's happening is MFA is being subverted in other ways, for example, via some form of phishing. Or there's a very funny story about attackers just bombarding the user with prompts until the user just goes, okay, I'll answer. But I think Elaine's point is we need to prepare for a future where mobile phones are being actively targeted, and the key point there is vulnerability management. I think at this point that's the priority. Do you know what your users have? Do you know what patch level it's at?
That's it.
Jeff, I'm going to move on to, I think, some questions regarding the ransomware theme. So Diana Robinson There were several questions around the point that ransomware is moving to non-English speaking countries. And mostly they had to do with whether you're seeing similar trends in other geographies in EU. So you mentioned sort of Central Europe, Diana, but there's questions about Denmark and other. Are you seeing similar trends there?
Very good question. I haven't specifically dived into the Nordics per se, because I think the other ones just stuck out. I mean, we do see a very wide range of countries being targeted, and I think it would be worth a small analysis to do that, but I cannot say right now for a fact that we do see that.
I can comment, Diana, because I happened to look at that data a little while ago, and the problem that we have is overall the numbers of victims in those, like for example in the Nordics, are so small that while you do see a significant uptick, you know, it's from like 5 to 10 or something. So I think the trend is there, but it's not. I don't think it's visible. I don't think you can't assert it from the data. What I would say, and Robinson, I'll be interested to get your view on this, is that I also have a theory that language, culture, and the sort of accessibility of the business ecosystem to the cyber extortionist plays a role. So I think in America and the UK, it's easy for an extortionist to figure out who is this company, what do they do. They can read the internal documents, get a sense of what their value is, you know, interpret the insurance policies, etc. But if you're dealing with a Danish company, that's expensive. You know, that's hard work to do that. And I have a theory that perhaps that contributes to, you know, why those non-English speaking countries are being targeted less.
It might be so, but you might be giving too much credit to most of these cyber extortionists. Some of them are really, let's say, have an industrial approach of going in, looking at everything labeled confidential, grabbing that, grabbing everything that looks like personal data, encrypting everything, and moving on.
True. Final comment on that, just I think there's a difference between the attack, which I agree is completely industrialized, but then the process of actually extorting the victim, which requires a person, right? And
I completely agree with you, and the attackers I described are not very successful at the extortion part.
Yeah.
Still, they encrypt and create a victim.
Yeah.
I do wonder, just to chime in.
Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
I do wonder whether the actions by the US government and the announcements and some of the actions made by US government have fed into this. I mean, Robinson, you talked a little bit about that. Is that potentially good news? Well, it's shifted the problem somewhere else, but for the US,
it is good news for the US for sure. Yeah. Yes, it worked. Well, it worked for a bit, and it worked for a bit everywhere. Because threat actors wondered how exactly the Revel's infrastructure got breached, how exactly the ransom was recovered from DarkSide. Was it because of some magical technology the US had that allowed them to de-anonymize a Tor node? So it basically these threat actors were put in a position to being forced to defend their infrastructure and to rethink their operational security and to rethink their threat model. And this caused most of the big names to drop down from the face of the planet for a couple of months. But if you ask me, is the response to Colonial Pipeline a very good policy for a state to say, borrowing the words of Dmitry Alperovich, if they go after our companies, we will release the hounds and go after them? My opinion is, yes, of course, everybody should do that.
Robinson, Dana, I'm going to ask you to stay with me because I have a couple more questions to throw your way. But Jeff, just on a note of logistics, I got a message from the organizers to say we only have 5 minutes left. We still have a lot of questions, but from our perspective, we're happy to carry on. So if we haven't gotten to your question by the end of the session, we'll stick around. We'll try and address it, and we're happy to take more. Speaking for myself, I hope I'm speaking for everyone else also. Dinah Robinson, another sort of set of questions that we get are around the attack methods being used, and there's really two. There's a general one from Maria that says, what are the most common techniques? I think she's talking more sort of about the technical approach that we see in the EU. And then there's another one that speaks about a shift, or asks if we're seeing a shift from email as a vector for delivering malware and phishing to other channels like social media, WhatsApp, etc. I wonder if either of you have a comment on that.
I do.
Go ahead, Robinson.
To the second question, the shift from email, kinda, but no. So we have seen threat agents do get into contact with their victims through WhatsApp for the extortion part, also through Teams, and also in some cases through the company's social media. And in some cases, the company's social media is also targeted as an asset to seize and to hold for ransom. But for initial access, email is still the way to get on someone's computer as opposed to mobile device. For the initial access method, in the cases we've seen a disproportionate amount of, and it loops back to another topic, vulnerabilities on VPNs. And this is because a couple of very popular VPN appliances had very high impact vulnerabilities that were massively exploited by threat actors to target our customers in Europe. And then the age-old, we send you a malicious attachment and you open it and we end up with a foothold on your network is still the main thing.
Thanks, Robinson. So yeah, that goes back to the point about vulnerabilities in security product and the role that it's playing. Diana, a final one for you, if you don't mind. There's a question from Jimmy about where these criminals, these cyber criminals, are sitting. Is it just Russia, or are there other places that they come from?
If only we knew. I think there's some assumptions or theories where they're sitting, and I think the arrest of some rebel gang members have shown that there are conversations right now in the underground, and there's some fear and some doubt if Russia is actually still the safe harbor they were, but it's really hard to tell where they're from. And I think seeing the increase of diversity that we've talked about before, I think, and then also the flexibility of the ecosystem. So are we talking about the ransomware operator? Are we talking about initial access broker or the affiliates? It becomes really complex to actually know where they're from. I mean, at the end, you could recruit affiliates from any country, really, and you could start to look at skill sets like language to confuse us.
Which is what Robinson was saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really hard to know. I think there's some theories out, but how can we know for sure?
Well, one thing we can say, though, is that some countries are the perfect storm of having a very good education in IT and very little employment for people with good skills in IT and IT security. So you think of the former Eastern Bloc, you think of Northern Africa, where you have this, because when we look at what initial access brokers do, they are quite competent pen testers. and they would earn much more if they had a legitimate job doing that. So this is where the criminality comes from. And I mean, in cyber, as in outside of cyber, you have young people with a good skill set and no way to gain rightful employment.
Very good point, Robertson. Just Charles, sorry to interrupt. I'm just aware we're coming. Well, we're a little bit over time at the end, but for our audience, if you could please stay on just a second, we'll be answering some more of the questions. As Charles said, we've got a few questions backed up, but we just want to quickly put another question to you, because obviously you've seen the 4 topics that we introduced here and that we've been discussing. I'd be quite interested to know at Orange Cyberdefense, they'd like to know whether whether you want a particular specific session on any of these things. So we're going to put up another poll for you now, and if you want to, you can vote and say, would you like a webinar specifically on this particular topic? And it'll be interesting to see whether that maps to the one that you found most interesting at the beginning. So please cast your votes now. Just to remind you, the 4 topics we had were the manufacturing sector being disproportionately targeted or affected, geographical shift of ransomware attacks to non-English speaking territories and countries, increasing vulnerabilities targeting mobile platforms, really interesting debate around that one, and also, of course, vulnerabilities in security vendor products, a really hot topic in the issue. So please cast your votes now if you want to have a particular session on those. Obviously, Orange Cyberdefense is really useful information, because if there's a particular topic that you found really, really fascinating, we really want to hear from you. I'm going to give you, let's say, 10 seconds to just cast your vote there. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, interesting. Really interesting. Yeah, a fairly even split there between the different topics. Vulnerability in mobile platform, interesting. Takes the lead. Manufacturing sector, thanks to Charles' tremendous pitch at the beginning, people are interested in that. But listen, take all that, Orange Cyberdefense will take all that into account, and you may well see a particular session on those now. So listen, we're going to keep going for a little bit. We've got some more questions to answer. Cheerio, and thanks to those of you who attended, but do stick around if you want to hear a bit more from our folks. Charl, I'll hand back to you now.
Thanks, Jeff. Emmanuel, I wonder if I can throw a question your way, and others can chime in too if they have an opinion. But there was a very interesting question from Ricardo. Unfortunately, I had to leave, but he said he'll watch the recording about the impact that cloud services have on security posture overall. In other words, does the shift to cloud increase or decrease, the overall risk profile for businesses? Do you have a view on that?
I do. Always a tricky question, because it's something we cannot stop. Everyone is aware of that. What we see is actually the speed, because we all have to cope with that the speed within cloud and within cloud services and the speed at which they evolve is really much bigger than the on-premises equivalent. So on the security point of view, the end result is that we have to adapt the way we do security in those environments. So it has to be at the cloud speed and not the usual on-prem speed we used to. So things like vulnerability management is something you look at totally a different way within the cloud than on premises, for example. Now, having said that, there's also the usual discussion, I might say, of you have the cloud providers who are responsible as part of that security element. But typically, we don't see a lot of things happening around that. So yes, we see some vulnerabilities popping up with the usual suspects. I won't give names, but you know what I mean. But next to that, the most elements we see are typically mistakes. So things which are badly configured, or that indeed you don't know what you can do about securing that environment. That's really the biggest issue, is to get to know the technology to start. And we see that there's still a gap there. And it is as well on the customer side as on the provider side, because there again, what I said earlier on the security vendors is even worse on the cloud providers. They have to go even faster, which means that the testing side is probably less efficient than it used to be.
Manuel, I've got a thought on. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe a last point is also the way that applications are evolving. And we see that in different cases recently. We cannot say anymore that application has a vulnerability within the cloud. It's typically all the modules which make that application, which might have a vulnerability. And that makes it even more complex. So on that point of view, it might bring a bigger risk. On the other side, yeah, it is a smaller module, so we have to see what's the impact of it. And we see that with Log4j. It's really hard to say what's the impact actually within an application in the cloud or not, actually.
Yeah, very good point. We should have a discussion, Jeff, about software supply chain security also.
Indeed.
Well, yeah, I mean, the cloud security thing's really interesting. I've been thinking for a while, if you look at where the next obvious, supply chain type attack is, it just seems obvious that it's cloud. It's where everybody's storing their information. For ransomware attackers, that's got to be the target. And I just wonder, have I missed it, or has there not been a really big? We've seen misconfigured cloud stuff, so people misconfiguring their cloud storage and getting compromised. But unless I've missed it, I don't think there's been a sort of wide-scale cloud provider who's been popped, and all of their customers, or their users rather, have been impacted. Have I missed that one, or was that sort of happen?
I would say what we've seen is maybe the denial of service, and I'm not saying that they were attacked by denial of service attack, but actually they were not available, which basically is the same, right? So we've seen outage, to call it like that, happening, and there again, in your business continuity as a customer, you have to think, what do I do then if my provider is not available? But that's not so much related directly to security. It's more to the availability of the service itself. Which might be related to a security incident. It's sometimes the case, but sometimes it's just a software error.
Jeff, we only have two more questions, and I wonder if I could ask Elaine to join us again, and Leon and Dinah. I think you might also have an opinion on this question. And while you're joining, I just want to kind of segue from the cloud discussion to this next discussion, which is about mobile security. And I have the sense that we're seeing many fewer vulnerabilities in the cloud technologies. So you really don't have to worry about patching, Office 365 in the same way that that you have to worry about patching on-prem Exchange. But it does move the security perimeter to the identity of the user. So in cloud and zero trust, it really all comes about, do I know who this person is, and do they have the privileges on this on the system? And that again is leveraging mobile security a lot, and so the mobile, I think, sort of becomes a key component there, which is why this topic is so interesting to me. But the specific question was about other mobile OSs that we might recommend, and Damien specifically asks about Graphene and Sailfish. Do you guys have opinions on, would you run another? Would you recommend not running Android or iOS in favor of something else?
I could take a stab at that. I think there's two things to keep in mind with that. Graphene, Sailfish, Lineage, all of these kinds of things are not the manufacturer supported operating system. And also an interesting thing at the same time, notice how all of these are Android based ones. In the iOS world, there's no alternative. It's iOS, and that's it. And sort of the marriage between hardware and software there pays its own dividends. So really the question is a little bit about Android here, right? I think my personal perspective on that is much like the cloud-based services where you're probably not patching the server side anymore. Holistic security architecture and responsibility sort of sits largely at the cloud provider. Comes at the cost of, if they get compromised, the impact is significant. So their investment in terms of preventing that is arguably higher, or should be. And in a similar vein, I'd probably think an Android device that is as close as possible to its clean, doesn't have, you can say, crackware, other nonsense applications that you don't want with it. Increasing the attack surface drives us towards this. Let's install something like Lineage or Graphene or whatever, such that stuff is a lot less. But if you look at, for example, the Samsung type phone, they have these bolted-on security measures that try and harden the environment a little bit more. You know, this extra bit of hardware integrity with Knox and other sandboxy things that they do, you know, actually improves the state of things, which, and this is sort of the point I want to make. When you think about an end user, they're probably not in a position to be able to flash their phone with a custom firmware. And if they are, there's a number of responsibility that comes to increased access to things implies you understand what's going on. Or, you know, let's a Google or a Samsung or whatever other major provider sort of deal with that component. You know, a reasonably modern, up-to-date phone lifts some of that responsibility off you. I'm not saying, you know, it's foolproof, but I think for the general purpose use there, that's probably the better way to go. It's not uncommon to flash with custom firmwares. And if you're absolutely capable of using a device like that, do that. You know, you have control you probably wouldn't have otherwise, but it comes at a cost of understanding that ecosystem a little bit better. Is what I would think around that.
Diana, Elaine, you have an opinion? I know you looked at this, Diana.
Just the thing is that, for example, for Samsung, they use Knox and Enterprise Mobile, a new marketing Enterprise Mobile, we should say, and in fact, that's why I suppose Samsung decided to go there, because they wanted to secure their mobile. Because we do consider, everyone is considering that the iOS is more secure, but we said before it was not true, than Android, and Samsung decided to enforce the security on the mobile with the Knox solution. So yes, we do consider that we have to enforce the security, and that's a way to do that for me.
Okay, and I just want to add, I really like to think outside of the box sometimes, and we always, you know, compare those two, Android and iOS. But I mean, there are other out there, and I think, Charl, that's why you point me out here, is that I've recently done a little investigation on, you know, Linux-based phones. You know, there are some out there like Fairphone or Pinephone or Librem or so on, and that goes a bit more like protecting privacy, for example, for its user. But I think when we look who's the safest or who's the most attacked, it's just such a small amount of users using Linux-based phones that I don't think it's attractive. It goes a little bit into the model, Charl, that you mentioned also in, you know, cybercrime theory and manufacturing, like the visibility is probably not there. The attractiveness to attack those kind of systems might not be as big as with the most common used mobile phone operation systems.
And in France, for example, our policemen, gendarmerie, we call it, is using a specific Linux mobile phone, and which is more secure for sure. But and in France, we do also have this kind of solutions, which is based first from an Android solution, but which has been rewritten, and everything is blocked on it. And normally it's more secure, and that's it, because you do need to have gateways to access on it, etc. So yes, some things exist, but I should say it's confident. It's for VIP people and something like that. So yes, we can do that in France, for example.
I think if I can steal the last word on that topic, I think for an enterprise, similar to the debate about vulnerabilities and security technologies, the question isn't, you know, which is more bugs or which is more vulnerabilities. The question is, which vendor can I depend on to find and respond to those vulnerabilities? Let me know and equip me to patch them and know that I'm patched. That, I think, is the state that you want to aim for. We still have more questions, Jeff. I personally can go another 5 minutes. I don't know about the rest of you. Anyone have an opinion? Some are quite interesting.
I will, unfortunately, I need to pop off because I've got another meeting. But very happy, Charl, to let you keep going if you want to.
Well, why not? We still have some people logged in. So, Jeff, thank you very much. It's always so much fun chatting to you, and good luck with the book. I know.
Thank you.
I'll be signing up for it.
Thank you all. Thanks all to our speakers. I thought you all did a great job. See you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Leon, don't disappear, because I have a couple of questions that that may go your way. But before I do that, just to everyone, a note from Dan, who points out that there was a ransomware incident referred to as Backboard, who he says may have been an attack against a cloud provider. So that he posted a link into the question section, which we can all take a look at. But Leon, the question I wanted to ask you was also came to us from Dan, and this came to us from Ola, and Ola comments about the Log4j vulnerability and the use of or the production of scanners for the Log4j vulnerability. You know, everybody wanted to find it. How do I know if I'm vulnerable, where I'm vulnerable? And that apparently, you know, these scanners were popping up everywhere, and everyone was downloading them and using them to scan their organizations. And I guess it's just a question about, you know, why does that happen, I guess? And did you see the same thing? And also, is it really a risk, you know, to like download a third-party scanner like that, and run it in your environment, not knowing really who it came from or what it does?
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it. You know, because there's a lot. One of the questions is, which one is the best one? Which one is going to give me the most accurate results? So to maybe take a step back, I think it's great that there are many, as you know, something like Log4j, which I'm sure many are tired of hearing of by now. But any vulnerability that has a similar reach and impact, there's this natural information.
Sorry to interject. I think Ola's question is specifically about not so much about which one is the best, but how do you know which ones you can trust? In other words, trust in terms of your own security, in terms of not being malicious.
Absolutely, and that's sort of the point I want to get to. Like, I think, you know, many of them will pop up, like in the Log4j case, and it's an amazing opportunity to sort of leverage a crisis. You know, everyone is going to be downloading scanners because everyone's worried, and you know, this combination of panic makes for a great time for a malicious actor to just write a scanner that does something else. I don't have any smart advice that is going to tell you how to choose the better one, other than, you know, the code is absolutely the source of truth. If you're going to download a executable somewhere, that's not in a way that you can see what it's doing. You probably want a script that you can interpret, that you can run yourself, you know, that you can read the code for. And that's you know, the best version of that. That said, commercial scanners also started adding these checks, you know, the more reputable ones, the Nessuses and the Qualises of the world. There are also very popular community-based scanners, such as Project Nuclei, if I'm pronouncing that correct, that you know, has a large set of people focusing on building scanners that you could arguably trust a little bit more than an arbitrary script on GitHub by a user that's only committed for the first time in their life yesterday, which might also be an indicator. So really, it is a matter of, you know, read the source, try and understand what it does, ask for help, you know, if you're not sure. But erring on the side of caution definitely will pay dividends. And I think it's because it's a great opportunity to get someone to run something they shouldn't. The panic is a great setup for that.
On that note, incidentally, the NCSE, of course, recently announced their lightweight vulnerability scanning capability for small businesses based on Nmap, which I thought is a great response. It's a great idea, and it kind of creates an ecosystem for this sort of scenario, doesn't it? So now it can be a trusted source using a trusted tool that says, hey, here's the tool, here's a script. Run it yourself. I think that's definitely something to support and keep an eye on.
And you mentioned Nmap. It's had scripting capabilities for a really long time, right? You could write a little NSE, which I'm not sure about Log4j, but there are probably hundreds of those as well. So maybe a future version of Nmap includes one that, there's a bit of trust around Nmap in terms of what it does, which you could probably trust more again than the military script.
And the nice thing, of course, about the NSE building a free capability around that is if you're using Nmap and the NSE publishes a script, then you don't have to, perhaps you don't have to understand the code, which is nice for a small business. You can trust them. Leon, stay with me for the last question, but I also want to ask Andreas if you're still there, if you won't weigh in on this one, which is about API security. And it's Xavier who makes the point that, with automation and SOAR and, just the way the web is being architected now, you're seeing so many more APIs. And so the question is, are APIs an important attack vector? And I guess, how does one think about them from a security point of view? Andreas, are you still with us? Not sure. Leon, I know you guys look at and talk about and work on APIs a lot. Do you have a comment on that?
I have thoughts around it, and it might not be exciting, but I don't think it's a lot different necessarily to what it's been historically in terms of an external attack surface. If you had to compare that to just an arbitrary website, you'd be sending requests somewhere, you'd be interacting with fields, etc. And that sort of means of working with a remote service is fundamentally the same from an API perspective, except now it's structured, it's documented, it's encouraged to use that for an integration perspective. Where the interesting parts come in, though, I think is what happens behind that curtain, because we could say as a metaphor, the API is effectively a bit of a curtain between an arguably much more complicated business process behind it. So at face value, I don't think the use of the word API changes much from what you're probably already doing. But it is the move to service-oriented architectures and other significant architecture changes that could introduce some vulnerability or different ways of thinking about them.
Leon, thank you. Sorry we didn't get to hear from Andreas on that. That is all the user questions I have. I still have a few dozen of my own, but I think out of respect for everyone's time, let's call it there. To the panelists, Emmanuel, Robinson, Leon, Diana, Andreas, Elaine, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences with us. And to all the people who attended, thank you so much for your time. We know you've got a lot of pressure on you, so we appreciate you putting some time in your day to speak with us. Our team has promised they will send out an email with a link to this recording as well as the slides. And also, we have another version of this running this evening for the kind of Asia Pacific area. So if you'd like to recommend it to someone else, or you'd like to do it all again, we will be on again this evening. And with that, thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye for now.